Ah, why hello. I'm already on. That's probably better. We'd start with something a little cheerier here. It's always good to start with some conversation about gardening. It's uh it's such a beautiful time of year to be out thinking about the garden, be out in a garden, and to be enjoying the cool weather, the snow on the ground, thinking about how the garden can grow in the next year. Hey, everybody, thank you for joining me. Of course, tonight I'm going to be talking about gardening as I always do. I'm going to mention gardening and we'll answer gardening questions when we're over. But again, like last time, I just kind of feel like it's out of touch to some extent. And gardening, no matter what you're looking at, if we're looking at this idea of building a more enlightened and happy and just and harmonious society that everyone is going to be happy in and that everyone is going to feel like they can thrive in, then gardening, I believe, is an important part of that. Gardening not only helps us care for the environment and for ourselves and eat healthier food and keep the people in our communities healthier. It helps us build the sort of ecosystem where we can all thrive over time, right? So gardening is always an important discussion. Talking about gardening is never out of touch, in my opinion. However, it does feel a little bit out of touch to just jump right into the topic. So I would like to, when there's so much going on, and when I have been trying to talk about gardening and when I've been trying to discuss these things, people have been asking me, hey, a good 10 by 10 foot? Hey, you know what? I got a whole book about that. The key to abundance, and in all my videos, to be quite honestly, I thought I'd cancel. No, I had trouble joining tonight, so I'm sorry I'm running a little bit late, and part of the reason is that I had trouble making my... Thank you, I'm glad it seems like an interesting topic. No, part of the reason is that I had trouble putting my materials together and getting online here with them so that they worked. So I'm glad you still caught me, Carrie. I'm sorry I'm late. Usually I'm on right at 7. I'm going to try to be on right at 7 on Thursday. I'm going to be doing a special one and specifically talking about this topic and how to discuss it with people in a constructive way. And also, I think it's really important to discuss these topics right now in a non-judgmental way, a non-accusatory way. I think you've probably realized in your own life that people don't like to be accused. And when we accuse people of things, they shut down immediately. I'm sure you've had that experience. So, in fact, on high-level permaculture, Carrie here was in one of my permaculture design certificate courses. In fact, hello, by the way. In one of my permaculture design courses, we talked about nonviolent communication. Because when we're talking about permaculture, we start in the garden. But then we take those things that we learn about ecology and how we are beings in an ecosystem, and we try to figure out how to apply them to our lives so that we can make a garden of our lives. Thank you so much for the gift there. And by the way, I am going to be having a new permaculture design certificate course. Depending on when I schedule it with the people who've already registered, we're running a little bit, we're starting a little bit late this year, but we're probably going to start in February, and it just depends on who all joins and how we line that up. But I will be doing another permaculture design certificate course. I think that's always a fascinating way to plan a garden and to get going and started on gardening, especially if you want to do a gardening business. So that will be coming up in the future. And on Thursday, I will be speaking or kind of trying to lead a discussion and answer questions Not about the question of, in these times of crisis when we're all running around with our lizard brains triggered, and we're in these which, when that happens, when we go into amygdala mode, into fight or flight mode, we start to use emotional reasoning. We have trouble accessing logic and reason, and just start to confuse our emotions with reason. And we start to see everyone as either on our side, defending us, or a threat to be defeated. So once we start to get locked into that amygdala lizard brain, discussion gets to be very hard, which again is why it's so important to have these kinds of discussions in a non-accusatory way, and invite anyone who wants to be involved in this kind of discussion to think and discuss about how we can try to overcome that amygdala response that we get locked into, the fight or flight response, so that we can try to, because I think what we all want is to build a better society where we're heard and our concerns are heard, and where we feel safe and secure, and where we can all get along and have a harmonious, thriving society together. So being able to get past the lizard brain emotions and see that we're all Americans and try to call in with each other is a very important topic. So that's what we'll be talking about on Thursday at 7. Hey, thank you so much. I'm so glad that you enjoy my content. All the pictures that I always, well, most of the pictures. Sometimes I show some other people's permaculture gardens, but most of my pictures are my own and my clients and my students' permaculture gardens. So yeah, I also, by the way, have some. I'm talking about an important topic. It feels kind of crass to be talking about how I've got books and do consultations and all that. So anyway, so that's a good way to jump right in to this topic that I would like to talk about. Before I do want to, I always want to lead with good gardening information here. So we mentioned a 10 by 10 space. Hey, that's great. That's great. Yeah, that's a great gardening tip right there. Is that especially if you focus on the kinds of plants that can become self-sowing and that can succeed into grassland type ecosystems, which is, I assume, what you have. You probably have full sun, you got some grass and grassland. Do I sell skirt seeds? I do. And Joe, I think you bought seeds from me, didn't you? If you bought seeds and plants, I probably sent part of the package. I'm sorry, I just violated your privacy there. But if anybody, I apologize for that. But if anybody bought seeds and plants from me, the plants will ship in the spring when they're ready to be planted, or close to the time that they're ready to be planted. I have seed orders going out all the time right now, depending on where you're at. If you're someplace like in the south where your season for planting is sooner, I'm sending those earlier. If you're to the north, I send them a little bit later, but most of those will probably go out by mid-February at the latest. So hopefully that answers your question. If you ordered one of my did last year, not this year, the skirt went into a garden for someone that moved. Okay, yeah. Well then, yeah. I still have some packages left. So they are getting pretty low. But I'm starting to get to the point where I still do have some complete plant packages left with skirt in them. Skirt and walking onions, some of my own garlic from a wild population in Michigan. What else is in there? Sea kale, and air potato yams. So some really good stuff in those plant packages. And cheapo, man. I try to, you're not going to get anything fancy. I don't do super fancy. I try to limit the amount of plastic that I use. And I try to limit the materials that I use, and I try to ship everything right on time and dig them and ship them as fast as possible so I don't use a lot of materials, and you get healthy plants. And it's not going to be anything fancy on the packaging, but really it's going to be a deal, you know. Like at raw you know, market prices, my prices would be something like probably 60% of what you would get anyplace else on these packages. But then I usually really double them up. So if you get one sea kale cutting from me, I'm usually going to send you 2 or 3. You know, if you get one skirt cutting from me, it's usually going to be a few of them in there. So I'm just saying, I think it's a really good deal. And part of the reason I can do that is I only do packages. I do them all myself. And, I don't really advertise. I just do it like this to people who hang out with me. Giving out about 10 sea kales from the one you sent me. That's awesome. I love that. You know, this is part of the magic of what we're doing with permaculture type gardening. These kinds of plants, these kinds of edible ecosystem plants are great to give away to people. People love them, and it's a great way to build community. All right. So thank you for the opportunity. Yeah, I do. I try to use as much with anything that I do. If I source and buy things, I usually will get them recycled too. So I try my best to keep the materials as sustainable and light as possible too. So let's switch over to this topic. I just wrote about this over on Facebook, so if you want to, you can join the discussion there too. Now this is a difficult topic, and so I am going to kind of put this up and read a little bit of what I actually wrote out, because when you're talking about difficult topics, sometimes that's the easiest thing to do. I don't have a clever way of doing this or a teleprompter, so you have to put up with me doing it like this. You know, the last few months, especially young men who follow me on social media, have started asking me an interesting question. What is wrong with fascism anyway? And again, I would like to make this a very non-judgmental topic. We'll treat it in a way like a political science class, where we discuss these things objectively. Well, anyway, the question did surprise me at first until I learned more that quite a lot of modern influencers and political figures, people like Nick Fuentes, who has gone pretty mainstream these days and has been getting a lot of attention, have begun to embrace the label and advocate for it and talk about it amongst themselves. In fact, recently there have been 2 or 3 discussions on Reddit from young men promoting fascism explicitly and saying why they endorse fascism and why they believe it's a good thing. So it's something I had studied in university in a class or 2, and I actually, when I was in Europe, I spent time and I went to both Auschwitz and Birkenau and studied there and did some programs there and learned about it. And so it was something I was very interested in and studied in. And so I've been reading a lot of things about it again lately because of that. So I'd like to offer a calm, non-judgmental, non-accusatory academic discussion about what fascism actually is and why it's generally considered a bad political and governing philosophy. Oh, by the way, it is mostly a political and governing philosophy, not a type of government or an economic system. And I'd like to non-judgmentally discuss the topic with anyone who's curious about it and try to understand. So if you have questions about this topic and you've been wondering and you want to just ask somebody about these things who's not going to be like, you're a jerk, and jump on you for it, I'd like to be available for that. So I understand that, there are certain kinds of cultural conditions where people start asking this kind of question and start looking into it, and they're curious. And there's never any such thing as a stupid question, right? The only stupid question is the one you don't ask, and then you get caught up in things that you shouldn't be caught up in. So to start with, what is it? Since fascism is often used as a slur, which means that everyone tries to define it in such a way that it applies to the people they disagree with, right? That way they can use it as like a cudgel to bash the people they disagree with. And usually that happens with conservatives. So serious nonpartisan scholars point out the important defining things about fascism, the things that made it bad, right? For example, fascists are always patriotic, but being patriotic isn't bad or destructive. So if we define fascism as patriotism, we've missed the whole point of why fascism is bad. This is like when people will say like, well, you know, Hitler was a vegetarian, so all vegetarians are Nazis. Obviously, that doesn't make any sense at all, and being a vegetarian does not make you a Nazi, right? And so we have to be really careful about that kind of logic. So scholars like, let me see if I can move me. I can't move me on the screen. I'll pull up a different view of this in a second. So scholars who are serious about this and who are considered the non-judgmental, non-academic scholars that are accepted and respected by people across the political spectrum are people like Adorno, Arendt, and Umberto Eco. These are great people to read, great books, especially Hannah Arendt. They teach us the core traits shared by all fascist movements that actually make them bad. Like, if you're going to call somebody a bad thing, you have to focus on the things that made them bad. Otherwise, otherwise you're just calling somebody a name, and it doesn't make any sense. Patriotism is bad on itself. I think that, I'll tell you my opinion about this. I think that there can be healthy patriotism and toxic patriotism. And the reason, so I think that like our instinct to love our culture, to respect our culture, to have a culture can be good. Like I don't want to have a globalist culture where we just end up like with one global culture and we just all eat at McDonald's all the time and there's just one way of being. So I like the idea of having different cultures and having different ways of being in different nationalities and tribes in this sense. They just get to be destructive when we start othering each other and use them to go to war and all of this. So I'm gonna keep reading, and maybe we can filter through and think through this idea of where that boundary is. We should unify around a nation boundary and identity. Hey, how you doing? TikTok driving you crazy? I came on a little bit. I had trouble getting on, so I came on a little bit late. And I wouldn't say, I don't ever like to use the word should. But I do think that that we naturally build sorts of identities. And those can be healthy and those can be good, or those could be destructive and those can be bad, right? Like we can think, if we look at if we look at a lot of societies that were horticultural or hunter-gatherer societies, indigenous societies, where we look at them, like I talk about Kerala, India a lot. There's a way in which we could look at Kerala, India, and they used to have a bunch of different principalities and a bunch of different little mini nations, and overall inequality tended to be fairly low there. So there was very low hierarchy, very low oppression. Even the king or the prince was only a little tiny bit above his subjects, right? And we can look at the same thing in Native American culture. They had tribes, and Cherokee or Ojibwe were proud to be Ojibwe, and so there were these kinds of organizing principles. I don't think those have to be bad, and one of the reasons why is, like I said, we see it in healthy indigenous societies. Conflicts are resolved in the healthiest ones in more healthy ways and such. So if we're looking at what humans do naturally from an ecological perspective, we need, in my opinion, to find ways where we come together and live in such a ways that are enhancing for us as humans and are natural for us as humans, but that don't cause us to have these conflicts and go around murdering each other and stuff. That's my answer to that. Okay, I'm gonna find my next piece here. Didn't indigenous folks war to establish boundaries? Yeah, I'll answer that question before we continue on. They did, and it has been studied a lot. And maybe you're familiar with the term that has been thrown a lot, which was counting coup. And there were so scholars who've studied a lot of indigenous societies have often looked at them and documented what they call performative warfare. I'm running out of battery here already. Here, I can plug in. Aha! Or maybe I can't. Aha! I can. All right. So this is actually really kind of fun and cool topic. So, for example, and this was actually described multiple times by the first Europeans to come here. And it was described by different Europeans over the course of 100 years when they first encountered native populations in North America. So we know that a lot of North and South America was the same in this regard. And so, for example, some of the first to visit North America described Native American tribes lining up with each other and shooting arrows into the sky. They said the Europeans who documented this actually described this as though they thought it was absolute insanity. Amongst the tribes of the eastern woodland region, it was considered unethical and cowardly. It was considered cowardly to aim the bow at someone and shoot it. And in fact, it was almost considered that being brave was going up there into the line, into the shower of arrows, and daring to shoot your own arrow, and to show your bravery in that way. And then you run away. And everyone did that. And it was considered cowardly and unethical to aim your arrow at somebody and intentionally hit them. So, and the thing was, some people would be injured. Usually the injuries and deaths were considered to be very low intensivity. And so this was a form of performative warfare, which the tribes would have a disagreement, and the peoples of the tribes might get very angry and upset. And the way to solve this was for the leaders to come together, and then both tribes would demonstrate their bravery. They would come together in respect, and very often they would have a big party together afterwards. So this was often the way. And there are actually books about performative warfare. Now, this wasn't true, obviously, of every place in the Americas, because there were different tribes in different regions, and there were different regions at different times. In the Pacific Northwest, for example, we know that there was at least one tribe in particular that was much more violent and took slaves. We don't know whether or not, it's argued whether or not they started doing that after North Americans came and they heard and they learned the model from Europeans, or whether they had that system before Europeans came. It's hotly debated. But most of the time, when those kinds of societies would get out of balance, the surrounding tribes would take care of it. They would bring those back into order. So this was, and there's a lot of good books about it. And so this kind of gives us something more of what a healthy form of a tapestry of cultures and a tapestry of societies that's highly pluralistic, where everybody respects each other, how that kind of thing could look. Yeah. So, to continue on here, let me see if I can find my next one. This one? No. Okay, I think I gotta go just a little bit further. Okay. No, okay, so I got this. The scholars teach us the core traits shared by all fascist movements that make them bad are: 1, a strong belief in hierarchies. Uh-oh, I'm getting cut off here. I wonder if I've got a different view of this. So I was kind of having, I'll see if I can figure it out as I go. So a strong belief in hierarchies. of class and gender and national identity or religion or so on. Some people are more deserving of rights and power and resources than others. Strong hierarchies in fascism are thought to bring peace and harmony and prosperity and make nations great. And there's always a mythology, this is a universal thing in fascism, there's always a mythology that hierarchies were a natural and even sacred part of the nation's past, that once made the nation great, but those hierarchies were lost, leading to chaos, weakness, and decline of the nation. Hey, I appreciate you, friends. Yeah, so a caste system, exactly. And so that kind of like a celebration of that is thought to have made the society great. And then the next thing is violence and force then are justified to establish hierarchies. It's a belief that might makes right. And they often look back to ages of warrior kings and so on, where conquest and might made the law. And so violence and conquest and dominance aren't just necessary, but are actually celebrated in fascist societies, in fascism. Since might makes right, democracy stands in the way of it, and only a strongman leader can bring a return to greatness, a sort of neo-warrior king. Over time, this belief in the strongman leader becomes a fusion of personality, making fascism a sort of cult of personality. And some scholars now, modern scholars, are calling it a form of shared national narcissism, where there's a form of fusion of the self and identity and what is great with a belief in greatness of the leader. And so these things become, and because of this, the leader gives the rules and the law, and that hierarchy and the rules become what makes things right. So almost everyone finds, these three things are the firm, clear dividing line scholars use to tell the difference between fascism and conservatism. It's kind of annoying I have to go like this while I'm reading right now. Because everyone finds hierarchies a little bit distasteful, right? From the time we're kids, we're taught that everybody should be equal. Like equality and egalitarianism are kind of like a kindergarten level value that we're all taught. So because everyone finds hierarchies a little bit distasteful, and almost everybody, even though we find them distasteful, almost everybody believes to some extent in some level of hierarchy and inequality. For example, just between parents and their kids, or a teacher and their students. We almost all will believe and tolerate in some level of hierarchy, and that's what makes the left to right spectrum, right? So if you think about that, far left communists believe that everyone should be equal. It's a very laudable belief, right? And people on the far right then will believe in strong hierarchies, and that might and strength in a strong leader makes them right. So that gives us the complete spectrum. The shared narcissism is on spot. It's really interesting because modern day psychologists and political psychologists are really literally looking at narcissism and as a shared trait as far as what makes fascism function. So it's really, really interesting in that regard. It's or even, I think maybe sociopathy, antisocial behavior disorder. But they say it's actually collective narcissism. So classic Burkean so this is the difference and where the line is, where the scholars say the clear line is between conservatism and fascism, is that classic Burkean conservatives acknowledge that hierarchies are unfair and distasteful. Like they will acknowledge that hierarchies are unfair and distasteful. Like they will acknowledge that hierarchies are bad. Edmund Burke was a philosopher, and they were, of course, European, coming from feudalism, where there were these really unfair hierarchies. And the conservatives were saying these hierarchies are unfair. but but changing them too fast can lead to social conflict and all of these sorts of things. And so classic Burkean conservatives acknowledge that hierarchies are unfair and distasteful, but believe in tolerating them, some hierarchies, not all of them, but tolerating some hierarchies for the purpose of creating meritocracy, order, social harmony, rule of law, competition, incentive, these sorts of things that we often hear them talk about. So the point there then too is that conservatism necessarily is going to believe in things like rule of law and democracy. Even if they lose, they believe in the institutions of democracy because they're prioritizing security and harmony and peace in the society. And changing things too fast creates chaos, and they think that's bad for society. Now, one could make the argument that even if true conservatives slow up progress and hold us back, they're valuable to any society to help maintain continuity, make elders feel safe, and there's a lot of good reasons to argue for why classic conservatives have a place in making any kind of society better, even if people on the left feel like they're stodgy and slowing things down. You know, it's a respect your elders thing. And they're also often really respected in that way I need to go to where, because I'm not going to finish up here in time. I'm going to go and find a plug and plug in. I'm going to do it while I'm talking. So this is one of the reasons why in like indigenous societies, elders remain important. And in a really well-balanced society, we have both. We have people who are looking to tradition and the things that are valuable in tradition and maintaining those. And we have people who are young and more liberal and more progressive who are looking to change things, build a better society, make a society that's better for things and pushing things forward. The two together create a sort of balanced society, right? That's the theory, at least. That's the poli-sci theory. Now, this is where we see the clear line between conservatism and fascism. Fascism believes in winning at all costs, that might is right, and anyone who stands in the way is an enemy to be crushed. Because might makes right violates some of our most basic human values across all of our cultures, scholars agree there's one clear entry point to fascism that helps us distinguish fascism from conservatism. They call this moral inversion. Moral inversion is where the rules given by the hierarchy take the place of our own moral judgment. Fascism tells you, do not believe in your own moral judgment. Conservatism tells us, believe in your moral judgment. It's a big difference. Those are two things that are very opposite about them. So fascism will tell us the leaders, the rulers, the law, the hierarchy is what makes things right. You listen to it, and if you disagree, you are wrong. Whereas conservatism tells us, listen to your own moral judgment and do what's right. We can see that our founding fathers were, in this sense, conservative. Our Declaration of Independence is literally a call for civil disobedience. Our Declaration of Independence essentially says we have an inalienable right that cannot be taken by any king, and we have a right to disobey unjust laws. That is the statement of our Declaration of Independence. It's that our moral judgment is given to us is an inalienable right, and that not even a king, no king can take that away from us. So here we see a very clear difference, again, between fascism and this is how you become a pro on social media, right? By moving around and making sure you're plugged in and stuff. But this becomes a really important point here. So because these basic ideas of democracy and valuing each other and people having input and fairness, all of these are basic values that we're taught in school. as kindergartners, their basic human values across cultures. Because of that, the entry point to fascism requires a moral inversion, which is where morality is turned upside down. Rules given by the hierarchy take the place of moral judgment, according to Adorno, and protesting or resisting injustice becomes more offensive to people than the injustice itself. To prepare the way for this moral inversion, fascist movements always begin by teaching to celebrate injustice, to subvert moral ideas, making shocking jokes, celebrating cruelty, celebrating meanness, all of these things that make might right. Fascism actually thrives, according to Arendt. Fascism thrives on the thrill of subverting morality and saying shocking, cruel things. And that idea of saying shocking and cruel things becomes an identifier. So we see that with people like with Nick Fuentes that I mentioned earlier. Nick Fuentes loves to tell like shocking racist jokes and shocking sexist jokes. Oh, we're getting cat attacked here, folks. This is keep your butt out of the camera. That's embarrassing. Gosh. So I just have my cat in the pictures. But Nick Fuentes will use these shocking jokes as a sort of relation to the people that he's trying to agree with. And exactly, Carrie, it's just like how narcissists push boundaries over and over again. Having high levels of poverty and hopelessness within the population makes fascism more likely. 100%. And this is one of the things. Fascism is actually really bad government. It's a celebration and pushes mediocrity, because when you're using the government to enforce hierarchies, you get rid of the things that conservatives like, which is competition and meritocracy, right? In true fascism, you get rid of meritocracy. And so you're just pushing people because they're high up on the hierarchy. And it's a bunch of, everybody becomes a bunch of yes men saying, yeah, boss, that's a great idea. And so your society, in fascist societies, even if there's not a bunch of war, like in Franco's Spain, the economy stagnates, there's no good technological advancement, culture doesn't continue, it just becomes a very stagnant and bad sort of society. So that usually leads to increasing poverty and people being disappointed, which only leads to more and more ramping up of fascism, right? So this whole idea of like moral inversion is the antithesis of conservatism's appeal to decency, rights, and shared morality. And since, hey, thank you, Roxy. I appreciate the gifts. I appreciate anything you're doing here. I'm going to finish up. Does, of course, fascism, yes. So it becomes a downward spiral. Fascism always makes poverty more likely and social and economic stagnation more likely, and those lead to more pressures for ever greater amounts of fascism. Because even here's another thing from Arendt that I didn't put in here. Arendt points out that she has a 3-volume series on the development of fascism and how to combat it, and how democracies slip into authoritarianism. And in the third of those, it's all about the psychology of how this slide happens. Hey, Roxy, I appreciate you. If you have any questions you want to ask, I'll get to them. I appreciate you so much. So because of that, oh boy, I forgot what I was going to say. You flattered me so much with those gifts. I'll probably come back to it. Anyway, since fascism believes that might makes right and rules don't apply in hierarchies of oppression, fascism always snowballs. This is that thing right here, out of control. And this is a defining feature. This thing right here, a society cannot microdose fascism. We cannot microdose fascism. This is something that conservatives, we know very well, thought when Hitler was coming on. There were all of these conservatives saying that when Hitler takes power, the responsibility will moderate him. He'll become more moderate. Same with Franco, same with Mussolini. All of these times, the conservatives are hoping that the strong man will give them what they want. They'll give them stability, they'll give them control and harmony. Whatever the excesses of modern society are, they'll get them under control. They think that they can control these strongman leaders, and then you cannot microdose fascism. It always snowballs off control. For some of these reasons, some call this phase an extinction burst. Yes. And so, in fact, collapse is again one of the defining features of fascism because it always snowballs into this declining thing. It has, and the culture stagnates. And part of this is that everybody in this kind of situation where we've learned to celebrate meanness, learn to see everybody as an enemy, and we're running around with our lizard brain amygdalas activated all the time, looking for fight or flight mode, with images of violence around us and all of this. Nobody can think creatively, productivity plummets. Fascism is just simply a terrible place to be in, a terrible type of society to live in. Down here, once the line is crossed, such a philosophy makes its own enemies because nobody wants to be forced to live at the bottom of a hierarchy. They're going to fight back too. And since the whole philosophy is that might makes right, and we took America, so we deserve to run it however we want, and these kinds of things that you hear from people like Nick Fuentes, and that men can dominate women, so men should dominate women. The kinds of things that Nick Fuentes says. Your body, what does Nick Fuentes say? Your body, my choice, was his thing. Might makes right. I can take your body, so I'm entitled to take your body, is what Nick Fuentes says. And he says it, again, it's moral inversion. It's breaking that down. It's half a joke, half something to say to be shocking, but there's also a core of truth to it that we see then expressed in the movement. And this idea of might makes right always emboldens the resistance. Because if you're the person being oppressed and your oppressor is saying, I'm oppressing you because I can, and my might makes it right, then that person is telling you that if you can fight them back, you are entitled to do so. So fascism always creates an equal and opposite resistance that becomes violent, and fascist societies that don't burn out instantly in war end up in long-term, low-intensity civil wars with bombings and murders and this kind of violence continually going on. And with all this, the stagnation, war and imperialism always become a part of it too. Because if you've promised greatness to the people and your society is stagnating and going under, the only thing you can do to make it great is go and steal resources from someone else. And your whole philosophy that might makes right enables you to do that, and people begin to expect it. So fascism almost always comes with expansionism and war too. All of this combined makes for just a terrible sort of society to live in. And again, my whole point of this was to talk through it and explain it in a non-judgmental way. And I'm not saying that people are bad people. They get trapped into this sort of philosophy, and it only leads to a very bad place. And young men have been asking me, why is fascism bad? What makes it go that way? In fact, just like the last couple of weeks, I've been asked maybe 5 times by young men, why is fascism bad? They're wondering honestly. And this is the point. There's a difference between conservatism. Fascism isn't far-right conservatism. Fascism is a break from conservatism. Even if we disagree with people who are more conservative than us, their belief in fairness, good governance, a lack of corruption, and pluralism and institutions of democracy, even when they're wrong, strengthens societies. True conservatism, right? And so it's they may slow us down and slow down progress, but it is valuable to any society. When we cross this line into these three things, this idea that hierarchy is noble and good. To quote Hitler, Hitler said, hierarchy is natural and sacred. He believed that hierarchies were natural and sacred in all their forms. He believed that the German people were a hierarchy all of their own and above everyone else, a caste of their own. And that within that, the great men at the top ran things. And because their morality made right, they would say things like, they would be asked, well, where is the line? What do you stop? What is the law? And Hitler would say, the law is my own morality. The law is my own morality. It's what I think is right. Mussolini and Franco would say very similar things. And once you cross into that, it becomes this slippery slope that leads to not a very great society to live in. Hey everybody, thank you for joining me. I think it can be a blurry line though, especially considering how marginalized and disabled people have been treated under conservative leadership and government. Trump just said yesterday that morality is the only thing limiting his actions. Disagree, they may apologize for it, but they want hierarchy, which means there is no equality. And this does get to be, and here we see a thing, that anyone who's a person of color looking at this discussion, from their perspective, might look at the whole history of America and say it's all been fascist. There's actually a term, and I can't remember the term, for a form of democracy where there's democratic values and slavery. And these are very weird situations to believe in, because if you have slavery, you believe that hierarchies are sacred and necessary, but within your group, you somehow believe in pluralism. So the United States has always been that kind of a situation. True conservatism myth, no true Scotsman fallacy. I don't know about that. I would like to believe that it is a thing, that there is a line, and it's these things we were talking about. A person who believes in goodness and decency as opposed to this moral inversion, a person who believes in pluralism and believes in democracy, even if they lose, is still a conservative. The problem is that in the goal of winning, conservatism can start becoming proto-fascist and start taking on some of these fascist ideas really easily. And as we were saying, you can't microdose fascism. But I do believe there is a difference between, I'll say, like between Eisenhower. I'll say there's a difference between Eisenhower, to go back a ways. There's a difference between Eisenhower and Nick Fuentes, right? So I do think that there is I do think that there is a line, and that it becomes a false equivalency to say that that line doesn't exist. So I just want to point that out. And another thing is just, I think there's a line between when it gets truly out of control and we start to see this moral inversion broadly, and we start to see people arguing, for hierarchy in a very serious way. Yes, well, I think once we get into that discussion, I think that is a different discussion. Because then it becomes a matter of like asking people what they really believe. There may be a little bit of a mind reading fallacy in there, and there might be some things in that to consider. I actually believe that there have been true and principled conservatives all along, and I think that there have always been people who are on this like proto-fascistic kind of spectrum who are trying to push towards that and trying to use it. They think that they can microdose fascism, and it becomes something that snowballs until it can be stopped. No one's arguing to be lower in the hierarchy. Yeah, and that's a problem, and because of that, there will always, in a sense, be opposition to even classic Burkean conservatism, excuse me, which looks to tolerate hierarchies. And what I was taught too would be another place to the left of that. So as we move to the left of Burkean classic conservatism or conservatism, because I think that we need to draw a hard line between honest and earnest conservatism and what's beyond it. So, anyway, I have been going at this for quite a while here. I appreciate you all. I hope that this conversation has been good and that maybe it's been something that you can look to. I would love to continue it. I'm going to continue it on Thursday. So if you want to come back and maybe even join me in live conversation there, Terra Dreaming, I'd love that. Maybe in an ideal utopia, conservatism wouldn't be toxic. Yeah, I think it all depends on pluralism, and it depends on a lot of things. I think that you can't look at the structure of modern American society and totally judge it. All the same, yeah, I do need to go. I appreciate you all. I appreciate this discussion. I hope that if you're someone who is out there, who is one of those young guys or young women who wanted to know about this thing, why is it bad? You have that question. I hope that you found my opinion about that, and why academics and scholars consider it bad. I hope that you found this helpful. Anyway, thank you so much. If you want to continue this conversation in writing, you can over at Facebook, and I will see you all on Thursday. Have a good night. I'm glad it's appreciated. Thank you.